The cemetery was quiet. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft golden light over the headstones. Birds chirped in the distance, but one sound didn't belong. It was the soft whimper of a dog. At the far corner of the cemetery, next to a white marble grave, lay a large black German shepherd. His name was Ranger. He had been coming to that grave every day for weeks. Rain or shine, cold or hot, Ranger was always there. The grave belonged to Sergeant Daniel Hale, a soldier, a hero, and Ranger's best friend. Every morning, before the town woke up, Ranger would sneak out of his yard and walk the long road to the cemetery. He would lay down next to Daniel's grave and stay there for hours. Sometimes he would cry. Sometimes he would just stare at the headstone. He didn't eat. He didn't chase birds. He didn't wag his tail. People started to notice. The groundskeeper, Mr. Ellis, tried to move him once, but Ranger growled softly, not to hurt him, just to say, "Please let me stay." "Poor thing," Mr. Ellis muttered. "He's still waiting for his master." At home, Emily Hale, Daniel's wife, watched the front gate every morning. Ranger always returned before lunch, covered in dirt, his eyes tired and sad. He would curl up by the front door and sleep until the sun went down. He didn't play with Ben, Daniel's 10-year-old son, like he used to. He didn't bark when someone rang the doorbell. Ranger had changed. One evening, Emily sat on the porch steps with Ben. "Do you think he's ever going to stop going there?" she asked softly. Ben shook his head. "No. Dad gave him an order, and Ranger hasn't finished it yet." Emily smiled weakly. "What order, sweetheart?" Ben looked at her with serious eyes. "To protect something, maybe even a secret. You know how Dad was." Emily nodded, remembering how Daniel never talked much about his missions. "He did keep things close to his chest," she whispered. The next morning, something strange happened. When Ranger didn't return by noon, Emily grew worried. By late afternoon, she drove to the cemetery with Ben. They found Ranger just where they expected, next to Daniel's grave. But this time, he wasn't lying still. He was digging. His paws were muddy and a small hole had formed near the headstone. He worked carefully, not like a dog chasing a bone. He dug like he knew something was there. "Ranger, stop," Emily called. But the dog didn't listen. He kept going until his nose touched something small and metallic. He carefully pulled it out with his mouth and dropped it at Ben's feet. It was a pendant, dirty, old, and scratched, but Emily recognized it right away. It was Daniel's. "I thought they said this was lost overseas," she whispered. Ben picked it up and turned it over. There were tiny letters on the back. "To come home, find the echo." Emily stared at the message, confused and a little shaken. "What's echo?" she asked. Ben didn't answer right away. He looked down at Ranger, who was now sitting calmly beside the grave, eyes watching her closely. "I think," Ben said slowly, "Ranger just found the first clue." Emily's heart began to pound. This wasn't just grief. Ranger was trying to tell them something. After the discovery of the pendant, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something important was hidden at Daniel's grave. She and Ben sat in the car, staring at the cemetery in silence. Ranger lay next to the grave, his head resting on his paws, waiting patiently. "I don't understand," Emily said, turning the pendant over in her hand. "What does it mean? Echo. What's Daniel trying to tell us?" Ben didn't answer right away. He was lost in thought, looking at Ranger as if he understood something Emily didn't. "Dad never talked much about his missions," Ben finally said. "But I remember, there were times when he looked worried, like there was something he couldn't share with us." Emily nodded. She remembered that too. Daniel was always careful about what he said. It was like he was carrying secrets too heavy to talk about. But this pendant was different. It felt like it was meant for them to find. "Do you think there's more?" Ben asked, his voice soft with hope. "I don't know," Emily replied, "but I think we need to find out." That afternoon, they contacted Captain Reyes, one of Daniel's old friends and fellow soldiers. He had been a close partner of Daniel's during their tours overseas, and Emily knew he might have answers. When Reyes answered the phone, his voice was deep and weary. "Emily, it's been a long time. How's Ben doing?" "He's okay," Emily said. glancing at Ben, who was looking out the window. We found something. Something that might have to do with Daniel. Reyes paused. What is it? Emily explained everything. The pendant, the engraving, and how Ranger had found it buried at Daniel's grave. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Reese spoke again, his voice quiet. Echo, he said. I should have known. Do you know what it means? Emily asked, her heart pounding. Not exactly, but Daniel always told me that if anything happened to him, to look for the echo. It's a code, a mission that never finished. Emily's mind raced. What mission? What was he working on? There was another pause before Reyes spoke, his voice hesitant. I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you this. Daniel was involved in something big, something that wasn't supposed to be found out. He was trying to expose a secret, a huge corruption within the military. If anyone knew about it, they'd stop him from finishing his job. He wanted to make sure the truth came out, even if he didn't make it home. Emily's stomach tightened. So you think the pendant? It's part of the puzzle, Reese said. There's more hidden in places only Daniel would know about. If Ranger found the pendant, it means there's something else buried with him, something important. Emily felt a mix of fear and excitement. Daniel had died protecting something, and now it was up to them to finish what he had started, but they couldn't do it alone. Can you help us? She asked. Ray sighed deeply. I can, but we need to be careful. There are people out there who don't want this secret exposed. If they find out you're looking into it, they'll stop at nothing to keep it hidden. Ben, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. We can't stop now. We have to finish what Dad started. Emily smiled at him, though her heart was heavy with worry. You're right, Ben. We can't stop now. The next morning, they returned to the cemetery. Ranger was waiting for them by Daniel's grave, his eyes locked on the spot where the pendant had been found. Emily and Ben kneeled beside him, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. We're going to find the rest, Ranger, Emily whispered. We're going to finish this for Daniel. Ranger wagged his tail gently as if he understood. He stood up and began walking around the grave, sniffing at the ground, his eyes focused on something beneath the earth. Emily and Ben exchanged a look. We're not alone in this, Emily said softly. We have you. Ranger let out a low bark, and Emily could have sworn he smiled. It was as if, together, they were already one step closer to uncovering the truth. The next few days were a blur for Emily and Ben. The mystery of Daniel's pendant weighed heavily on their minds. They spent hours going over old photos and notes that Daniel had left behind, searching for any clue that might help them understand what Echo meant. Ranger, though, was different. He hadn't left Daniel's grave in days. Every time they tried to take him home, he would resist, refusing to leave the cemetery. It was clear now, Ranger wasn't just mourning his lost friend. He was waiting. One evening, as the sun began to set, Emily sat down next to Ranger at the grave. The wind whispered through the trees, and the quiet seemed to settle into her bones. I know you miss him, Emily said softly, running her hand over Ranger's fur. I miss him too. Ben was sitting nearby, flipping through Daniel's old journal. He had been reading it over and over, trying to piece together the mystery. Mom, there's something strange in here, he said suddenly. Emily turned to him, curious. What is it? Ben held up the journal. Dad wrote about something called Project Echo, but it's not like anything he's ever told us before. He said it was bigger than anything else he had worked on, and it wasn't supposed to be discovered. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Project Echo. It was the same thing Daniel had whispered about on his last night home, the same thing that had been mentioned with the pendant. What do you mean bigger? Emily asked, leaning forward. Ben read from the journal. If anything happens to me, Project Echo must remain hidden. But someone must find it. The truth must come out, even if I don't make it home. Echo is more important than anyone knows. Emily's hands trembled as she listened. She had always known Daniel had been involved in things he couldn't talk about, but she never imagined it was something so dangerous. We have to find out what it is, Ben said, determination in his voice. Dad wanted us to finish it. He wanted the truth to come out. Emily looked at her son, proud of his courage. You're right. We have to finish what Daniel started. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She would contact Captain Reyes again, but this time she needed more answers. They couldn't solve this alone. As she sat by the phone, about to dial Reyes' number, she'd heard a soft bark outside. Ranger had stood up, his ears perked, and was looking at the road with a focused expression. "What is it, boy?" Emily whispered, standing up to follow him. Ben came running behind her. Ranger walked to the edge of the cemetery, his nose to the ground, sniffing with purpose. Emily and Ben followed closely, unsure of where he was going. Ranger stopped at a large oak tree near the back of the cemetery, pacing around the base of it. "Is there something here?" Ben asked, kneeling down beside Ranger. Emily glanced around. There was nothing unusual about the tree. It was just a tree. But then, as she looked closer, she noticed something strange. The ground around the tree was disturbed, as though someone or something had recently dug there. "Ranger, what is it?" Emily asked, kneeling beside him. The dog barked again, then began scratching at the earth near the tree's roots. Emily's heart raced. Could there be something hidden here, just like at Daniel's grave? "I think we need to dig," Ben said, his voice full of excitement. Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." They spent the next hour carefully digging around the tree. Ranger watched them closely, his tail wagging. Finally, Ben's shovel struck something hard. They quickly cleared away the dirt and discovered a small metal box, much like the one they had found at Daniel's grave. "This must be it," Emily whispered. She opened the box carefully, and inside, they found another pendant, just like the first one, and a small folded note. Ben unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the words. It read, "Echo must be stopped. Do not trust anyone, not even those who call themselves allies. The truth is buried deep. Find it before they do." Emily's hand shook as she read the note. The message was clear. There were people who didn't want the truth to be uncovered. Ben looked up at her, his face serious. "We're not going to stop, are we, Mom?" Emily looked at Ranger, who stood beside them, his eyes full of determination. "No, Ben, we're not stopping. We're going to finish what Daniel started, and we're going to do it together." The discovery of the second pendant shook Emily and Ben. The note was clear, but the message was frightening. There were people out there who didn't want the truth to come out, and they would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. But Emily couldn't back down. Not now, not when they were so close. "We need to find out what this means," Emily said, holding the second pendant tightly in her hand. "We can't stop. Daniel risked everything for this." Ben nodded. "We'll finish it, Mom. We'll find the rest, no matter what." That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The message in the note haunted her thoughts. Do not trust anyone, not even those who call themselves allies. Who could they trust? Who could they turn to for help? The next morning, as they made their way back to Daniel's grave, Emily felt the weight of the situation pressing on her. They needed help, but they had to be careful. Whoever Daniel had been up against had power, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got too close. As they approached the cemetery gates, Emily was surprised to see a man standing near the entrance. He was tall, with a rough, weathered face and a military-style jacket. He looked like someone who had seen a lot in his life. Ranger, always alert, walked up to him and sniffed his shoes before sitting down and looking up at him. The man smiled gently and knelt down to pet Ranger. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "I remember you. You used to ride shotgun with Daniel." Emily paused, unsure whether to approach. Ben, however, took a step forward. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. The man stood up slowly, dusting off his jacket. "Name's Joe," he said, offering his hand. "I served with Daniel. We were in Afghanistan together. I was his team leader." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You were with him?" she asked, surprised. "Why haven't you contacted us before?" Joe looked down, his face turning somber. "I tried," he said quietly, "but things got complicated. I couldn't risk coming forward. Not with what happened over there. I had to stay out of sight." Ben stepped closer to Joe. "What happened? What's Project Echo?" Joe's eyes flickered with recognition. He swallowed hard before answering. "Echo was supposed to be a secret mission, something big, but it got out of hand. Daniel was the only one who knew the whole truth, and he knew he had to keep it safe. If anyone found out about it, it could destroy everything. Emily looked at him, desperate for more answers. What was the mission? What was so dangerous? Joe took a deep breath, glancing around nervously before speaking. I can't say too much, but I can tell you this. Echo was about exposing something inside the military, a conspiracy that involves some very powerful people. Daniel didn't want to believe it at first, but he couldn't ignore the truth. He knew he had to stop it, no matter the cost. Emily's hands trembled as she listened. She had always known Daniel had been involved in something important, but she never imagined it was something so dangerous. So why didn't you help him finish it? She asked, her voice shaking. Joe looked away, guilt in his eyes. I tried, but I was compromised. The higher-ups knew we were onto something. They made sure I couldn't reach Daniel in time. By the time I found out what he had uncovered, it was too late. Ben stepped forward. So what do we do now? We can't just let this secret stay buried. Joe turned to face them, his expression serious. You're right, we can't let it go. But you need to be careful. There are people watching. If they find out you're digging around, they won't hesitate to stop you. Emily's mind raced. They had to keep going. There was too much at stake now. But they couldn't do it alone. Can you help us? She asked, her voice pleading. Joe looked at Ranger, who was sitting patiently by their side. The dog's eyes were calm, but there was a certain understanding in them. Joe nodded slowly. I'll help, but we need to move fast. I know where there might be more information, but we need to be smart about it. We can't trust anyone else. Ben looked up at Joe with determination. We'll do whatever it takes. Emily put her arm around Ben, holding him close. We're in this together. We'll finish what Daniel started. As they walked away from the cemetery, Emily felt a new sense of hope. With Joe's help, they might finally be able to uncover the truth. But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The enemies they were up against were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Still, Emily was ready to fight for the truth, ready to finish what Daniel had started. And with Ranger by their side, she knew they could do it. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Emily, Ben, and Joe worked together to figure out where they could find more information about Project Echo. Joe had a few leads, but he warned them that they had to be very careful. The people involved in this conspiracy were powerful, and they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got too close. It's not going to be easy, Joe told them. But if we can find the right place, we might be able to uncover everything we need. Just stay alert. No one can know what we're doing. They were all in this together. Emily could see the determination in Ben's eyes, and she knew she couldn't back down. Not now. Not when they were so close. The first stop on their list was an old military storage facility about an hour outside of town. Joe had told them that it was where Daniel had been stationed for a while before his final mission. He had been there when he uncovered something about Echo, something that had led him to search for answers. Joe believed there might be old files hidden there, files that could reveal the full scope of the conspiracy. As they drove toward the facility, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time they passed a car on the road, she felt as if someone was following them. Her heart raced, and she glanced at Joe, who seemed just as tense. Are we sure about this? Emily asked, her voice low. Joe nodded grimly. It's our best chance. If anyone's going to know where the files are, it's going to be someone who was there. Daniel was close to finding out the truth, and he wouldn't have stopped until he had it. Ben, sitting in the back seat, was unusually quiet. Emily turned around to look at him. He had his head pressed against the window, staring out at the passing landscape. His face was serious, his brow furrowed in concentration. Are you okay, Ben? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I just keep thinking about Dad. He didn't give up. Even when things got dangerous, we can't give up either. Emily smiled at him, proud of his strength. You're right. We won't give up. We're finishing this for him. When they arrived at the facility, Joe led them through a series of locked gates and into a small building near the back. The air was musty and the light was dim. It felt like they had entered another world, a place frozen in time. The walls were lined with dusty shelves filled with old boxes and crates. Joe led them down a narrow hallway to a room at the back of the building. He paused in front of a large filing cabinet. This is where Daniel used to keep his things. I think the files we need are inside. Emily's heart pounded. Are you sure it's safe? What if someone finds out we're here? Joe glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was watching. We don't have much time. We need to find those files before it's too late. He pulled open the drawer, revealing row after row of old files. The yellowed papers inside looked like they had been untouched for years. Joe began flipping through them quickly, pulling out one file after another. There's nothing here, he muttered. Nothing we need. Emily's heart sank. Had they come all this way for nothing? She glanced at Ben, who was standing quietly beside her, his face tense. Wait, Joe said suddenly, holding up a small folder. This is it. Emily took the folder from him, her hands shaking. She opened it carefully, revealing a set of documents, some of which were marked with red stamps that read top secret. There were maps, photos, and reports, everything they needed to understand Project Echo. This is it, Emily whispered. This is what Daniel was looking for. Ben peered over her shoulder. What does it say? Emily scanned the documents. It's worse than we thought. Echo was about exposing a series of military cover-ups, corruption, illegal operations, and people using the system for their own gain. Daniel was close to exposing everything, but it looks like they were trying to stop him. He must have known he was in danger. Ben clenched his fists. We have to finish it. We have to make sure the truth gets out. Joe looked at them both, his expression hard. You're right, but we need to be careful. There are people who will do anything to make sure this stays buried. Emily felt a surge of determination. We're not backing down. We're finishing this for Daniel. Ranger, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly stood up and walked over to Emily, nuzzling her hand. It was as if he was telling her, we're ready. Let's do this. Emily smiled and rubbed his ears. We're in this together, buddy. Let's finish what we started. They carefully gathered the files and left the building, feeling the weight of their mission. They weren't just searching for the truth anymore. They were fighting for it, and they would stop at nothing to make sure Daniel's work didn't go unfinished. With the files in their hands, Emily, Ben, Joe, and Ranger felt a sense of urgency. They now had the truth about Project Echo, but it came at a heavy price. The people behind the conspiracy would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. Emily knew they had to act fast. As they drove back to Emily's house, the tension in the car was thick. Joe kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the road. It was as if he was afraid someone was following them. We have to get this information to the right people, Emily said, holding the files close. We can't let it stay hidden any longer. Ben, who had been quiet for most of the ride, spoke up. How do we know who to trust? If people were willing to kill to keep this secret, how do we know we won't be putting ourselves in danger? Joe let out a long breath. That's the problem. We don't know who we can trust. The people behind this are everywhere. People in positions of power who can control what gets out. But we don't have a choice. If we don't do something, everything Daniel worked for will be buried forever. Emily glanced at Ben in the rearview mirror, her heart heavy. We're doing this for your father. He believed in the truth, and so do we. Ben nodded, his face determined. We can't let him down. As they pulled into the driveway, Ranger jumped out of the car first, his tail wagging, sensing that something was about to happen. Emily opened the front door and stepped into the house, her mind racing with all the things they needed to do. They needed to figure out how to get this information out to the public, but they had to do it carefully. The wrong move could put them in even more danger. As she set the files on the kitchen table, Joe turned to them with a serious look on his face. We need to find a journalist, someone who's not afraid to expose the truth, even if it means going up against powerful people. Emily agreed. But how do we find someone like that? Someone who won't turn us in? We have to take a risk, Joe said. There's a reporter I know. Her name is Lena Mitchell. She's been digging into military corruption for years. If there's anyone who will take this seriously, it's her. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the break they needed. How do we contact her? Joe hesitated for a moment. I have an old contact for her. We'll meet her at a cafe in the city tomorrow morning. But be careful. If anyone's watching us, they'll be watching her too. We can't be seen together. The next morning, Emily, Ben, Joe, and Ranger made their way to the cafe. It was a quiet place, tucked away on a side street, and the kind of place where people could meet without drawing too much attention. They sat at a corner table, keeping their voices low, waiting for Lena. As they waited, Emily's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Every time a car passed by the window, she felt a chill run down her spine. What if they were being followed? Just as she was about to speak to Joe, the door to the cafe opened and a woman walked in. She was tall, with dark hair and a serious expression. She scanned the room before locking eyes with Joe. He stood up, and they exchanged a brief nod before the woman joined them at the table. "You must be Lena," Joe said, his voice low. Lena nodded, her eyes scanning the room again. "You're early. Good. I don't want to be seen here longer than necessary. What's this about?" Emily opened her bag and slid the files across the table. Lena's eyes widened as she saw the top-secret documents. "You got something big here," she said, her voice quiet but urgent. "We need to get this to the public," Emily said. "The people behind this are dangerous. We can't let them win." Lena glanced at the files, then back at Emily. "I'll take it, but this is going to get ugly. You understand that, right? Once this comes out, it's not just about exposing corruption. It's going to shake the entire system." "I understand," Emily said, her voice firm. "But we don't have a choice. This is bigger than us. It's about what's right." Lena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll make sure it gets into the right hands. But you need to lay low. If anyone finds out you're involved, they'll come after you." Emily looked at Ben, and he gave her a small nod. They were in this together, and they weren't backing down. Not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. Joe stood up, his face serious. "We've done our part. Now it's up to Lena." As they left the cafe, Emily felt a mix of fear and relief. They had done it. They had found someone who could help them expose the truth. But she knew their fight wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of tension and fear. Emily, Ben, Joe, and Ranger kept to themselves, staying out of sight as much as possible. They had handed over the files to Lena Mitchell, but they knew the danger wasn't over. The people behind Project Echo would do whatever it took to stop the truth from coming out. Emily spent most of her time at home, trying to stay calm for Ben, who was still struggling with the weight of everything that had happened. It was hard to explain to him why they couldn't just go back to their normal life, why they had to keep running, always looking over their shoulder. One evening, as Emily sat in the living room, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She slowly stood up and walked to the door, glancing through the peephole. She froze when she saw a car parked outside, with two men standing near it. They weren't familiar faces, but something about them made her uneasy. "What is it, Mom?" Ben asked from behind her, his voice full of worry. Emily turned to him, her mind racing. "Stay here, Ben. Don't open the door." She stepped back and quietly picked up her phone. She tried to call Joe, but it went straight to voicemail. Her stomach twisted with fear. What was going on? Why were these men here? She took a deep breath and decided to take a risk. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they just wanted to ask questions about Daniel. But deep down, Emily knew it wasn't that simple. Carefully, she opened the door just a crack, enough to speak to them without fully letting them in. "Yes?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands trembled. The two men looked at each other before one of them spoke. "We're here about Daniel Parker. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Emily's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't know who you are, and I'm not answering any questions. You need to leave." The man smiled coldly. "You don't have a choice. We're just here to make sure you don't cause any more problems." Before she could respond, the other man reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "We're with the government," he said. "This is official business." Emily's mind raced. She knew this wasn't true. The people involved in Project Echo weren't government agents. They were far worse. "I don't care who you say you are," Emily replied, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "You need to leave now." The man who had spoken before took a step closer. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. We're just following orders. Suddenly, Ranger, who had been quietly sitting behind Emily, stood up and growled. His deep bark echoed through the house, sending a chill down Emily's spine. The men froze, their eyes widening in surprise. Ranger was normally calm, but something in his instincts told him these men weren't to be trusted. Emily stepped back, her hand on the door. "Get off my property," she said firmly. The two men exchanged a quick look, then turned and walked back toward their car without another word. Emily closed the door behind them, her breath coming in short gasps. They had come too close to finding out what she and her family were really doing. Ben came up behind her, his face pale. "Who were they, Mom?" Emily shook her head, her heart still racing. "I don't know, but I'm pretty sure they're not who they say they are. We have to be careful. They'll stop at nothing to make sure the truth doesn't get out." The next day, Joe called Emily, his voice tense. "They know, Emily. They know what we're doing. We need to move quickly. Lena's going to publish the story, but we can't wait around. We have to make sure the information gets to the right people before they shut it down." Emily felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had done everything they could, but it wasn't enough. They needed to make sure the truth got out, no matter what. "We'll do whatever it takes," Emily said, her voice determined. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." Joe's voice was steady, but there was a sense of urgency in it. "I'll meet you in a few hours. Be ready." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily, Ben, and Joe made sure their bags were packed and ready to go, just in case they had to leave in a hurry. They couldn't stay in one place for too long. Every moment felt like a ticking clock. As the sun began to set, Emily looked out the window, her mind racing. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she knew they couldn't stop now. The truth about Project Echo was too important. It was Daniel's legacy, and it was up to them to make sure his work didn't go to waste. Ranger sat at her feet, his eyes watching the door, as if he knew what was coming next. Emily reached down and scratched behind his ears, her heart full of gratitude for the loyal dog who had been by their side every step of the way. "We're not stopping, boy," she whispered. "We're going to finish this." The tension was unbearable as Emily, Ben, Joe, and Ranger waited for the next move. They knew the truth about Project Echo was about to be revealed, but everything was on the line now. If they didn't act fast, there was a good chance the people behind the conspiracy would destroy the evidence before it ever reached the public. As the hours passed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the day before. The two men at the door had seemed so sure of themselves, so calm. But now, Emily was certain they were connected to the people who would do anything to stop them. They had come too close. They knew too much. "I'm worried, Mom," Ben said, his voice quiet but full of concern. He was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. "What if they come back? What if we can't stop them?" Emily sat down next to him, her heart aching at the fear in his voice. She put her arm around him and pulled him close. "We'll stop them, Ben. We've made it this far. We can't give up now." Ben nodded, but Emily could see the doubt in his eyes. She felt it too. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. It was like being in the dark, hoping that the truth would shine through, but knowing there were shadows lurking, waiting to destroy everything. Joe arrived at the house just after sunset. He was as tense as ever, his face hard with determination. "It's time," he said, his voice low. "Lena's ready to publish the story. We need to make sure she has everything she needs, and then we'll get out of here." Emily stood up, her hands shaking. "Where are we going?" Joe's eyes locked with hers. "We have to go to the publisher. It's the safest place to make sure the story gets out. But we can't waste any time. If we wait too long, it'll be too late." They quickly packed their things, grabbing only the essentials. They didn't have time for anything else. As they prepared to leave, Ranger trotted to the door, ready to go. Emily smiled at him. He had been a constant source of strength throughout this entire journey. She knew they couldn't have made it this far without him. "Stay close," she said to Ben, and he nodded. They piled into Joe's car and drove toward the city, the night sky dark and still. Every street they passed seemed empty, too quiet. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time a car pulled up behind them, she felt her heart race. It was like the world was holding its breath. Finally, they reached the building where Lena was meeting the publisher. It was an old, brick building in the center of the city, hidden behind tall trees and narrow alleys. As they approached, Emily's heart pounded. Was this the moment? Would the truth finally be exposed? Joe led the way, and they followed him closely. The building was locked, but Joe had a key. They stepped inside, the cool air of the building sending a chill down Emily's spine. The room was dimly lit, and there was an old desk in the corner. Lena was already there, sitting at the desk, waiting for them. "Everything's ready," Lena said as they entered. She didn't smile, but there was a look of resolve in her eyes. "I've spoken to the publisher. They're going to print the story tonight." Emily handed her the final pieces of the documents they had gathered. "You have everything?" Lena nodded. "I have it all. The truth is going to be out there, no matter what happens next." Joe looked at them both, his face grim. "We don't have much time. We need to go now. Once this is out, we'll be marked. They won't stop until they silence us." Emily's stomach twisted. This was it, the point of no return. If the story was published, everything would change. Their lives would be in danger, and there would be no turning back. But she also knew that it was the right thing to do. Daniel had died for this truth. They couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. "We're ready," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear inside her. Lena stood up and walked to the printer. She pressed a button, and the machine hummed to life. The sound was loud in the quiet room, and for a moment, Emily felt like everything was on pause. Would the world be ready for the truth? The printer spat out the first page of the story. Lena picked it up and handed it to Emily. "It's done," she said quietly. Emily took the page in her hands. It was real. The truth was finally out. She could hardly believe it. For so long, they had been fighting in the shadows, unsure if they would ever succeed. But now, it was in black and white. As the story printed, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, but they had done it. They had uncovered the truth, and the world would know. They had won. But as she looked at Ben, she knew the fight was far from finished. The people behind Project Echo would come after them, and they had to be ready. But no matter what happened next, Emily knew one thing for sure. They would never stop fighting for what was right.